Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. How you all doing today, gang? Your host is a little on the sweaty side as the temperatures have hit 30 degrees Celsius here in the UK, which I think is 86 Fahrenheit for my friends in the US. And I know I have listeners all over the world, and for some of you, it's winter right now. But I'd love to see where you listen to this podcast every day and maybe even take a peek at the weather where you are. Live my life vicariously through you. So if you feel like sharing and talking directly to the guy with a strange British accent that speaks into your ear every day, please email me your pics, questions or anything else to techblogwriter@outlook.com. Twitter, LinkedIn, everything else is at Neil C. Hughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Now, what I try to do in every episode of this daily tech podcast is explore a different industry every single day and try and learn a little bit more about the impacts that technology is having on that industry. But with real-world examples and the game-changing companies that are right at the heart of all this, trying to take away those pain points and frustrations and all that bad stuff. So today I invited the guys from TraceLink onto the podcast so we can explore the current challenges in the pharmaceutical supply chain. And once we understand the scale of these problems, I then want to take a deep dive into the digitisation of the supply chain itself and how it's helping the pharma supply chain industry comply with new regulations, prevent counterfeit medication and so much more. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Boston so we can speak with Paul Cianciolo from TraceLink. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Paul. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate being able to spend some time with you today. So I am the Senior Vice President of Business Management at a company called TraceLink, and we're a technology company that's trying to influence the way that medicine products are distributed and ultimately provided to patients. Really, our core mission as a business is to ensure transparency in the supply chain and make sure counterfeit products don't enter and ultimately the right products get to the right patients at the right time. And I've been with the company for the last 5 years or so. Been in the technology business my entire career. Before I joined TraceLink, I worked for quite some time in the venture capital business, and that was really how I learned and became familiar with TraceLink and got excited about the mission that we execute on today.
Excellent. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on, and there's so many topics I'm looking forward to exploring. But before we actually talk about TraceLink, can you actually help the listeners understand the actual challenges and the problems in the pharmaceutical supply chain at the moment and why the old way of doing things just isn't working in a digital age?
Yeah, that's a very loaded question. I could tackle it in a couple of ways. I would say, healthcare and life sciences has obviously been around a long time as an industry, and it's one of those industries that's absolutely imperative to how we live our lives. And anytime you're talking about the types of products that patients need to consume, there's obviously a certain level of safety and quality that's absolutely critical. And because of that, change sometimes takes a long time to affect, right? So when I've looked at other industries as an investor and as a technologist, they've moved faster because they're able to do so. They operate without some of those same constraints. So there are good reasons for some of the challenges in life sciences and healthcare. But at the same time, there's a rapid digitalization that's taking place within life sciences and healthcare for the benefit of patients. So if you're looking at consumer healthcare all the way up through drug discovery and development and everything in between, there's a lot of really interesting things happening. I would say one of the core challenges that we observe here at TraceLink across the industry is just a fundamental lack of the ability and sometimes willingness to exchange information with partners, be those trading partners in the supply chain or partners within the continuum of care. So that lack of the ability to exchange information interoperably and digitally leaves a lot of challenges out there that haven't been solved yet, and a lot of data that's sitting in silos. So, one of our aims is to be able to provide our customers and our partners here at TraceLink with the ability to be on a common platform, be part of a common network, and to exchange information for a variety of use cases, beginning with being able to track and trace medicines more effectively across the global supply chain.
And for people hearing about TraceLink for the very first time, can you maybe set the scene and tell me how TraceLink recalls workstream in tackling many of these challenges that you just mentioned head on?
Yeah, I think your question's really pointing to a really innovative and exciting development that we've been working on here at TraceLink. So a couple of months ago, we were approved by the FDA in the U.S. to be able to pilot a new type of technology that's really an end-to-end orchestration around a business problem and a patient-centric problem that's really critical for the industry to tackle, and that's around product recalls, or more specifically, prescription medicine recalls. So if you think about the recalls problem, and it's not certainly exclusive to medicines, you look at the number of food recalls, car parts, airplane parts, these happen all the time, right? When products are produced, sometimes there are needs to pull those back to the manufacturer or to some element in the supply chain to fix something that's gone wrong. And when we're talking about medicines, it's absolutely critical that certain types of recalls are affected very, very quickly. Unfortunately, the vast majority of recalls in the past take months and months in terms of identifying those products, where they've flowed into the supply chain, have they made it into hospitals and pharmacies and dispensers, have they been dispensed to patients, and the difficulty in identifying those products and then pulling them back quickly is a huge patient safety problem. It's a huge financial and brand problem for the medicine manufacturers as well. So this recalls workstream, as you put it, which is part of a pilot that we've been running with a number of customers and partners here at TraceLink, that represents pharmaceutical manufacturers, contract manufacturers, wholesale distributors, pharmacies, hospitals, retail chains, and a couple of reverse logistics providers as well. When we think about problems here at TraceLink, we really try to tackle them on an end-to-end basis. And recalls is one of those challenges that everyone has a vested interest in helping solve on behalf of the patient. And if we can do that, we take a lot of financial waste out of the system too. So at no point in the supply chain is that more apparent than at the pharmacy and hospital floor, where they're dealing with 50, 100 recalls in a given week. And they don't know if they have these products, if they've ever received them, if they've dispensed them to patients. The advent of serialization, or a unit-level identification of products, is a game changer for all of this. So when you add that serialization component with a common platform where people can exchange information, you can really start to attack problems like recalls, and we're trying to do that on a network-wide basis.
And I also recently read that TraceLink is going to be leveraging blockchain and digital recalls across its digital supply network and collaborating with participants from right across the pharma supply chain, essentially to enhance patient safety while addressing those challenging business processes. But can you tell me more about this pilot? Because it seems incredibly exciting, and especially how you're leveraging these emerging technologies.
Yeah, it absolutely is incredibly exciting. We certainly agree. I think blockchain has been one of those technology terms that nearly any company and any industry is trying to attach themselves to over the last couple of years. So, we've really been, studying blockchain for a while now, and recently we started to incorporate this technology into a couple of our solutions. And it's important to note that, at least from our perspective, we look at blockchain as an enabling technology, not necessarily a solution in and of itself. So when we think about blockchain, we think about the characteristics that make it an interesting technology. So certainly the decentralized nature of how information is processed and how things are determined to be true or not, the immutability of really the answers that you get to some of the questions that are being leveraged across that decentralized a database, if you will, those are really interesting characteristics from a technology problem to start to apply to some of these distributed problems. So recalls is a great example. There's also a number of initiatives related to the United States Drug Supply Chain Security Act, or DSCSA, that require, when we get to 2023, a full end-to-end verification capability upon a suspect product or potentially a recall or a number of other events that an authority may want to inquire about. And the industry needs the ability to be able to exchange information. So when you think about the decentralized nature of blockchain and being able to apply some of that technology, it becomes very exciting to understand, what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the other things that we need to take into account. So similar to that digital recalls pilot, that work stream that you described, we also have another pilot going on an end-to-end basis with a number of customers to determine how blockchain can attack some of these problems around anti-counterfeiting, which is, as you pointed out, a very exciting proposition.
And I'm glad you mentioned that there are so many different companies trying to attach themselves to this technology and ride the wave, and there's a lot of hype around it. But do you think blockchain will step up and be that game changer that many believe that it will be?
That's a great question. If I knew the answer to that, I'd be a highly sought after commodity. Unfortunately, I don't know how it's going to play out. What I can tell you is that I think the technology itself holds a lot of promise. But again, it isn't a solution to every problem out there. I think that people really need to be thoughtful about why this particular database technology with blockchain is better or worse than other traditional database technologies. SQL, NoSQL. There's lots of different centralized and decentralized technologies, cloud hosted, on premise. There's all of these variations of what could be deployed. So I don't think it's going to solve all problems, but I certainly think that when you're talking about hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of partners who need to agree upon the answer to a common question, there are certainly opportunities where having that consensus driven on a decentralized basis could be very, very interesting. And so time will tell. I think that like any good technology company, where we've continued to study and test the technology and really collaborate with our customers to better understand how they want to incorporate that. And the best technology products are often driven by customers and driven by customer demand. So TraceLink approaches that with blockchain in the same way.
So my understanding is the blockchain workstream will also bring together end-to-end stakeholders from the supply chain to evaluate how blockchain can be used to help companies meet those 2023 DSCSA transaction information gathering requirements. And for people outside of the industry who might be baffled by that sentence, can you tell me a little bit more about these requirements and actually the challenges that surround them?
So, essentially DSCSA, or the Drug Supply Chain Security Act in the U.S., is a country-specific set of requirements that have been really written into legislation to protect the supply chain against counterfeit drugs, right? So it's basically a 10-year time horizon that slowly ratchets up in terms of the complexity of the requirements themselves. And ultimately in 2023, culminates in the industry's ability to exchange information about certain product conditions upon request, virtually instantaneously. So as an example, if I was a patient or a pharmacist who had a serialized product physically in my hand and it looked like it had been tampered with, it looked like the product packaging could be a little different than I expected, I would be in a position with a regulatory body to initiate a suspect product verification, and that would trigger a set of events which would essentially lead to me inquiring to the person or company that I bought that product from, who they bought it from, who they may have bought it from, and then ultimately back to who manufactured it, either at the principal pharmaceutical company or at the contract manufacturer. And the goal is to be able to tie all this information together very, very quickly to be able to understand, do we have a problem with the chain of custody or the quality of this product? Today, at the lot level where things aren't serialized uniquely, that's an incredibly difficult process to chase down. And it typically takes the FDA or other governing bodies months and months to piece together an investigation to be able to understand whether a problem exists. And obviously in that time frame, illicit or bad actors can do things that are damaging to patients. And when you're talking about products that cancer patients or other folks who have critical issues that need their medicines to work each and every time they take them, that months of investigation is a horribly high cost to pay.
And like you said a few moments ago, blockchain is not suited to every use case and every project out there or every industry. And there are a few projects out there that are guilty of trying to squeeze a round peg through a square hole. Yeah. And TraceLink doesn't feel that way at all. But for those blockchain non-believers out there, can you tell me a little bit more about what blockchain enables you guys to do? What wasn't actually possible until now?
Yeah, it's a really poignant question. So, I think when we're exploring blockchain technology, there are two fundamental ways to deploy, and one is on a centralized basis where you're running a private network. The other is on a decentralized basis where it's essentially a public network type of an approach, and you have a public blockchain that anybody can access with the appropriate permissions. I think what we've recognized is that blockchain is a fundamentally different thing than Bitcoin, if you're familiar with the currency. And with Bitcoin, the actual medium of exchange needs to be authenticated, certainly, so it's not double spent. But what one Bitcoin is as good as the next. It's a homogeneous products. When you're talking about a specific serialized medicine that is unique down to that physical level, it's obviously needs to be represented properly. So these are the types of things you have to take into account when you're exploring how to make this work in the real world with real products that people depend on. So what we recognize with kind of how we're exploring the blockchain scenario is that we need to provide tools and the ability for large companies, small companies, medium-sized companies to be able to use blockchain technology as business users and not have to understand the code, which is part of the maturity cycle that blockchain has to go through before it's really a mass market type of a product. And we need to be able to maintain kind of the efficacy of that information while also not exposing, confidential company information publicly, right? So that's one of the challenges with public blockchains is that all the information about the transaction, even the participants, is available on the blockchain itself. Now, you may have a pseudonym that represents you as a person. So Paul may be represented as a particular coded entity, but it still ties back to me, and it's possible to make that tie back. Now, when we're talking about pharmaceutical companies and distributors and pharmacies, they're not going to want to necessarily put all of their public information or all of their confidential information publicly on the blockchain identifiable to them for the types of products they may be buying, who they're buying those from, et cetera. So there are these challenges that you have to deal with. And what we're doing is determining what information can be kept on block and publicly available, and what confidential information can be kept off block, so that it can remain confidential to the company and shared under only very specific but highly secure circumstances. So, I think what you're hearing from me is just a maturity that we're trying to drive into our use of blockchain that hasn't been there in at least our industry thus far.
And I know it is very early days at the moment, but what kind of feedback have you received so far from the pilot?
So we've actually been in the pilot for about 6 weeks. We started in the early June timeframe with both digital recalls as well as our blockchain pilot called Trace Histories. And what I can tell you already is that the participation and the excitement has been extremely high, as you might expect. Certainly blockchain being the phenomenon that it is, people are trying to understand more about it. And then with digital recalls, I think that some of the early feedback is just that it's such an acute problem for the industry globally, and that it's so patient-centric in nature that the kinds of people you're able to attract to these types of pilots are really, really phenomenal, and the types of companies that are willing to be represented in these work streams is phenomenal as well. So I think it just underscores how kind of technology can pair with industry for a solution that makes both business sense in terms of saving money, driving better efficiencies, those really important digitalization effects, if you will, that are business centric, with the quotient around doing well also, and the doing well in our case is around patient safety. So the early learnings have been this is absolutely possible to network together, to be on a common platform, to exchange certain types of data with each other around problems like a recalled product in such a way that people feel secure about sharing that information, but they're doing it in real time, where you have the ability now, as this solution continues to progress, for a pharmaceutical manufacturer to send information as soon as they know they have a problem about an individually identifiable product or set of products that can be conveyed to the people that they sold that product to at the distribution phase, directly to the people at the pharmacy and dispensing phase, and then ultimately on a serialized basis out to the patients as well. So if you can imagine what used to take 9 months or a year to identify 70, 80, or 90% of recalled product could now be done in a couple of days. It's just a completely different paradigm for how this process could unfold, which is why everyone's excited about it.
And what's next for TraceLink then? Is there anything else you can share with us today about the future and any deadlines or roadmaps to get to where you need to be?
So, we're hard at work. Our core mission we continue to focus on helping the industry share information more effectively to combat counterfeit drugs. So, the EU requirements kicked up and began in February of this year. Brazil's, coming up quickly. Russia launches later this year. The way we look at it, 90% of the global medicine supply chain will be serialized and under some form of these legislative requirements in each individual country over the next 5 to 7 years. So there's a lot of work for the industry to do just on the compliance and information sharing front for that purpose. But the extremely exciting aspect of this is when you invest in the way that the industry is to serialize products and start to share information, you break down some of these walls, right? So on that same common platform, we're releasing the capabilities for these industry partners to start to define who their networks of trading partners and patients are, and to begin sharing information around things like clinical trials or specialty product administration, adverse events, things that go far beyond the legislative requirements and really start to cut into patient-centric use cases like those I just described, as well as starting to tackle some supply chain specific ones as well. So how do we share information to better manufacture products? How do we ensure that we have proper supplies at the proper places? How do we demand forecast more effectively? If you're a pharmacy or hospital, how do you combat shortages? So on a common platform with information sharing built in and the ability to define your network and who you want to share data with, you start to be able to write your own script, so to speak, as a company and determine as a business user, what problems do I want to solve? And I have this core platform capability and this network to leverage to be able to do that. So a very, very bright future here and for that of the industry and ultimately for the patients that we serve.
Well, I think we've covered so much ground today, but for anyone listening that wants to find out more information, continue to follow the progress of your pilot there. What's the best way of finding you guys online, and maybe even contact a member of your team if they do have any additional questions too? So,
certainly tracelink.com. You can reach out to us. There's a variety of folks that are listed online that folks can reach out to. I'm always available on LinkedIn. We try to drive up our social presence as much as we can. So we certainly encourage people to reach out with ideas, things that they want to tackle, opportunities that they feel are underserved, that they think a platform capability in life sciences could help them try to tackle. We're always open to collaborate.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show today, Paul, and enabling everybody, including myself and everyone listening, to take a deep dive around what's coming up in the pharmaceutical industry and sharing info more effectively and ultimately digitising the supply chain. It really is an exciting time in that industry, and it's great to see how technology is bringing it all to life. So a big thank you for sharing that with me today, Paul.
Absolutely, Neil. It was a pleasure to be on, and I certainly look forward to exploring more with you in the future.
What I loved about this conversation is, yes, me and Paul are both clearly excited about how emerging technologies such as blockchain could change everything. And a vision of creating the world's largest integrated digital supply network, providing real-time information sharing, is mouth-watering indeed. But at the heart of all this, it's not a story about technology at all, is it? It's about providing better patient outcomes. And that's what I loved about today's interview. And plus, of course, Paul was incredibly easy to talk with, and I hope to get to meet him over a cold beer or a hot cup of coffee one day when I'm on my travels. Speaking of which, in a few weeks I'm off to Croatia, and in September I've got an event in Berlin. So if you listen in any of those areas, send me a message and I'll gladly meet you for a quick chat. And for everyone else, please email me techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, or pop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. But that's it for another episode, but have no fear, you're not getting rid of me that easily. I'll return tomorrow with another guest and we'll explore how technology is transforming another industry. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.